I wanted to spend some time here chatting about the Bret Hart A&E biography because we both had a chance to see it. This concludes A&E's series, their WWE series, and tackling, a subject in Bret Hart that there has been no shortage of documentaries produced on. And this one was directed and edited by George Roy, who is the director who also did the Booker T one. And I thought that, first of all, I thought they chose a lot of strong people to be interviewed for this, some of which I was surprised by. But, certainly the fact when I saw that you had Heath McCoy, who did the Pain and Passion book that he was in, that we interviewed when we did our documentary. He was in this. You had various family members. You had Dave Meltzer in here. I was, somewhat surprised to see some of the people that they interviewed, just such as Diana, for instance, who, her and Bret have had significant, fights over the years. Very nasty stuff publicly. But that was also something in the documentary that they did not really go into any of the family drama, which there has been no shortage of. There have been books written on. They stayed away from all of that. And it kind of just concludes with Bret Hart, who is taking his life out of wrestling and seems to be very happy at this stage of his life now.
That was the presentation, and, going into all of these A&E documentaries, for most of them, I really went into them with very little anticipation because, in the case of somebody as big of a star as Bret, so much has already been said about him that I don't know how much more new there is to say. But in almost every case, I sit down and watch them, and I'm actually quite surprised at how much maybe I appreciate having an updated look at many of the topics that we already know about. And in Bret's case, having maybe sort of a, more of a digested and clear look at some of the later happenings in his career, even post comeback, to see what he is like right now. And the image presented at the end of this documentary is one of a man who finally seems to have been able to move on. And has been able to find more to life beyond just Montreal or even caring about his own legacy. And maybe that's not the case in real life, but the way it was presented felt like here's a guy who has achieved maybe the greatest thing you can achieve beyond, being a successful wrestler. He's surrounded with grandchildren and children and a beautiful wife, that to me was a wonderful, moment to see my childhood hero kind of ride off in the sunset with, a picturesque ending.
Yeah, it was going to be interesting to watch. You knew this one would tackle Montreal, and it certainly did. I would say it was maybe the most, sizable portion that they dedicated to. They did pace this pretty well. There's so much, even in a 2-hour format, there's so much that you can cover with Bret Hart, but I thought they did a pretty good job with the pacing of it and trying to hit on the key parts. There's always going to be stuff that's left out because that's impossible to do in 2 hours with commercials. But with Montreal, if there has been one consistent throughout this, and this should come as no surprise, but it's so obvious in all of these, is that the WWE is not going to come under scrutiny for all of this. In times when where you could challenge them or look at things from that perspective, I think you're just not going to get that kind of reflection. And when you have a Vince McMahon that is still maintaining the fact that this guy could have shown up the night after the Survivor Series, it's almost at this point where there are people that are just going to accept that as fact, despite all the facts that are out there, and that you do have the people on here that can very much outline everything beat by beat, including Bret, including a Meltzer, including a Heath McCoy, including a Ross Hart that's in there as well. I was curious to hear Vince's...
So why couldn't he have shown up the next night?
For Bret. So for those that are not familiar with the specifics of it, is that Bret was still under contract with the WWF, and he was going to be for several more weeks after agreeing to the deal with WCW, and to the point that Bischoff had even extended because originally Bret was still going to work that December pay-per-view, which would have been December the 7th, and Bischoff extended it so he could have stayed till December the 7th. This was not a case of Bret was like Jeff Jarrett at that No Mercy pay-per-view, where it was, this is your last night in the company. We have to get the IC title off of you because you could show up on Nitro the next night. Jarrett could do that because he was legitimately done with his contract and was free to go the next day. His contract had expired. With Bret, he was still under contract with the company. And even on top of that, you had, the precedent of like the legal issues that WCW and WWE had. Like, there was no way WCW was going to put that championship on their air. And for the other paranoia of, well, Bischoff could go on Nitro tomorrow night and announce that we have the WWF champion. The fact is, Bret was committed to WCW. The window to shut that deal was November the 1st. So that's, at that point, the deal's done. And November 3rd comes and goes. Bischoff had that opportunity that night to go out on Nitro right before the Survivor Series. He could have really fucked WWF and said, we've got your champion. Nothing of the sort happened. And even after Montreal, Bret doesn't appear on Nitro until well into December because he contractually couldn't. And that's even after, like, the contract realistically was broken. When they did the screw job, like, that was a breach of contract given what the language was in the deal. So, I mean, it's something that I think a lot of people will just take that at face value. The facts just don't add up to that being any kind of a possibility that Bret could have shown up the next night, and he didn't. And the fact was that had Bischoff wanted to go out there and proclaim, we've got your champion, he had that opportunity and did not do it. And everyone was of the understanding Bret was going to finish up with the company for several more weeks after Montreal.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I don't know if this particular documentary would have been the place to like get into the weeds of stuff like that. But as far as like what Vince thinks at this point, I also wonder how much of an answer he really gave for so much of it. It felt like the Vince interview was to cover every single one of these things that he appeared on. And I would assume for the Montreal answer, I mean, that just seems to be his line, that he just gives.
Yeah, I mean, you also have just, they really do focus on the relationship between Bret and Vince in this. And you have that line from Bret that I would have jumped in front of a train for Vince McMahon. And this is when they're going over like the 96 period when he gets the offer from WCW. And it's for significantly more than what WWF can offer. But what WWF can offer is a 20-year contract that we'll sign you for 20 years. And Bret was happy with that. He was going to take so much less money. And again, like when you just look at it, I just think the way the facts present themselves, it's like, here's a guy that gave up so much more money to stay with WWF. And it just seems, got essentially, I think once you see so much of this, you can understand why Bret, I think, took this very, very hard. It was more than just simply like a business deal gone wrong. It was really just such a betrayal for someone that, he held in high esteem. And you could argue that Vince McMahon is not someone you probably should have held in that kind of father figure role. Like, at the end of the day, this is Vince McMahon who 10 years earlier, when he had bought Stampede Wrestling, I mean, he reneged on that deal with Stu Hart. So, I mean, there was kind of a precedent here that, I mean, he had a very close relationship with Vince McMahon and maybe had his blinders on to a degree to think that, he would be above such an act that Vince McMahon would commit upon him.
I definitely think if you watch any of the documentaries that have covered the topic, it's, I would say, maybe I'm biased because, I mean, I grew up a Bret fan, but I would assume most people watching these things are Bret fans and they're going to side with the protagonist. In most cases, I do think, you'll have a lot of people actually who do side with Vince and can understand Vince's perspective. But ultimately, I think the role of a documentary is to try to lay out the facts and let the audience choose for themselves. And I think in the given amount of time, this documentary covered Montreal like pretty fair. I think they gave us all the updated information regarding it, including like the whole setup prior to it, the nugget of information that we received, I think, not too long ago with what is it, Sean telling Bret that he wouldn't do the same for him, that type of thing. That was mentioned again here in something like this. The creative control was added in there. And Bret, this part was where he said the home country thing. He almost saved it as sort of like a last part, like a part that wasn't as important as the rest. But Bret was saying, like, on top of it all, you wanted me to do it in Montreal, I wasn't going to do. Like, he was almost saving that as like a bit of a bonus. But we got clips from Wrestling with Shadows. Like, again, the way I judge these isn't necessarily by whether or not I found it novel or I learned anything, but more so, how would a brand new fan who doesn't know a whole lot about Bret Hart,
who just watched Shayna Baszler and Lily and somehow has to dive into this level of seriousness attached to this industry?
I was maybe more so thinking your typical A&E fan. I don't even know what they are on A&E, but if they had some idea of who Bret was but didn't know the story, I thought that it did a relatively good job of laying out a pretty complex situation, for a novice fan.
I would certainly say, like, with like the full rundown of like Montreal, I think it is best served for a newsletter or a book where you can really go through. It doesn't really lend itself to something like this. I mean, like, you could see where certain interview subjects, you could imagine, could probably speak at length about this and are going to get edited down and quickly. And it's what is the most succinct way to tell a complex story. And sometimes you're going to get certain aspects that are just not going to make it in. They're not going to dedicate that amount of time to an interview subject.
And I imagine like the producers of this were already probably combating the criticism of expectation that, this would focus too much on Montreal. When I think so much of Bret's battle is that his life and his career is a lot more than just that particular incident. So, of course you have to focus on it. It is arguably the most interesting. Unfortunately, it is arguably the most interesting thing about this man's career because it transcends professional wrestling. It becomes a real life story that is just captivating to anybody, whether or not you're a wrestling fan. So you do have to use it. You have to talk about it. And they kind of express it as sort of like, like the way it has been presented to the public, that it is like sort of the beginning of his downfall, leading to a succession of just terrible life occurrences until he makes up with the company again. But maybe even going backwards a little bit, I thought it did a really good job of, recapping his rise. There was a lot of, as far as like new stuff, I thought it was pretty neat to see like a lot of that old footage of him in Stampede.
That home, the Stampede footage, Bret owns that, his own matches. So that's why, it was taken off the network, and it was like Bret owns his own matches. But the home video footage they had, like of Stu and Helen in the office, I don't know what the source material, like, I imagine it was just home video stuff. I don't think it's ever aired anywhere, but that stuff was really a great find on their part.
Yeah, and even like the young photos of like Stu and Helen, and seeing those two like when they're young and incredibly attractive, when all I've ever thought of them were like two old senior citizens, was quite amazing. And we also had like Bret Hart's old short film that he made.
Oh, the lizard! The lizard was
the
great.
Iguana. Like, that was awesome. This was like, as far as new information goes, like that, like you get a very comprehensive, I would say, look at who this man was prior to him even entering the WWF.
They also leaned into animation for certain scenes. Like, you could see like a lot of work went into this. I'd be curious, like, the timeline of how far back production began on all of these documentaries, to be quite honest. But yeah, I really like that. Again, it would have been really interesting to see kind of the, like, so many of the family members that they did get in here. His ex-wife was featured pretty prominently as well. Julie, she was in this as well. I thought it was really nice to hear that, like, Bret and Julie, the fact that, you could see like these two still have a lot of admiration for one another, and, their, divorces are never easy, but it was, I think both with the absence of, or at least the extended amount of time now since they've been divorced, like, I thought it was really nice that she could be in this. And, they were both like very complimentary of one another. Bret mentions the fact he was unfaithful, and he is brutally honest about that fact in his book, of what life on the road was like for Bret Hart throughout a significant portion of his career as he's touring all over the world. But I thought they found like a lot of interest. I would have loved to have heard more of Ross, because he is like the unofficial family historian. And he just kind of pops up right near the end when they're talking about Owen. And I think some of the earlier parts, I mean, if you're talking about the history of Stampede, like Heath McCoy and Ross Hart, you've got your bases pretty covered there. But it was like a nice selection of people that they had throughout this.
Sometimes, like, if two people give, like, the same amount of information, it might just come down to, like, who sounds better on camera.
Yeah.
So that just might be that. It was really nice to be able to hear from the children, because we haven't really had that in some of the other ones, just to be able to hear the perspective of, like, Jade, talking about what it was like to have their father not be around. I found Bret's comments about the Sunny Days, Shawn Michaels' comment, really interesting. I don't recall him, or at least I hadn't heard him speak about that on camera. But, him talking about...
I had never heard the portion that he had said about his kids asking him about that. And that's, man, like, it's really hard to just... Like, Sean pretty much just said, I was... Like, he really had no basis for it either. And
we know Shawn Michaels was a total dick back then. Yes.
Yeah, but it's like, I don't know. It's like, the guy gets, I think, excused for a lot of stuff because it's, that was Sean. It's like, Sean was an asshole. And that was a really, really terrible thing to say on TV. And to have your kids ask you about that, that's pretty, pretty low.
On top of, the troubles that he was probably already having at home, as he was mentioning. So, there were some like little bits of information that I found very refreshing, very new. Of course, you have to, talk about all the big pivotal moments of his career. They talk about the Hennig match. They talk about Davey Boy, which I thought they made look really great. Like showing all the clips from the family acting. Helen is like such a great actress. I don't care what any of you guys say. She's my favorite of the Hart.
How about that promo with Bruce with the Bulldog shirt on? And
so good. But then
we didn't have Bruce in this.
No Bruce here. But the Bret Owen feud, they spent a lot of time on. And then of course the big double turn Survivor Series, and then at SummerSlam and then Survivor Series. So even the wrestling itself, I felt like it was like a relatively short section, but nonetheless, I think told you everything you needed to know in a Cole's Notes version. No time spent at all on the WCW run.
Correction. Literally 30 seconds on WCW, which was summarized by, they were so stupid, they didn't know what to do. I spun my tires the whole time there. That is how the dude literally summarized like 3 years.
We had more time spent on his Lonesome Dove run as Luther Root than in 3 years of WCW.
That he called like what did he say? Like, it was like the most fun thing I've ever done in my life. Lonesome Dove.
I could buy it, sure.
Yeah, the WCW time, like, I don't know how much, like,
it's not relevant. It's not that relevant outside.
Well, I think it's relevant in the sense that I think, listen, did WCW blow things with Bret Hart? They absolutely did. I also think like Bret was very much, I think he realized that instantly. And you could see like Bret Hart it was just not the same Bret in 98 as there was in 97 in WWF. Like, this is going from the hottest guy in the company in the WWF at the time. And you're going to WCW, and I'm sure he was, mentally checked out in WCW.
Yeah. And I would say if you're going to recap anything outside of like, the concussion, of course, like it would be maybe the steel plate incident with Goldberg, but then of course it's the Owen match, right? And who did he have the Owen match with? You're not. Yeah,
that wasn't going to be shown here. Which, those were the high points of his WCW run. Would have been like those would be the two I would come to when him and Benoit at Kemper Arena. And that's it really does put it into perspective. Like, I think for wrestling fans, it's like they focus on Montreal, but it's like what this guy went through in the years that followed that, from the loss of his brother, Davey Boy, his parents both dying, the stroke, cancer. I mean, it's one thing after the other. There's so many deaths around.
Did cancer even get a mention in this?
They didn't even get around to that.
Amazing.
I mean, that was several years ago. It wasn't that recent, but not too long ago either. And it's just like, it's remarkable that he is where he is now. And, I think there's also something that he said that he, as they're reflecting on like the Montreal portion, it's like, I would not have changed anything I did. To people that think I took it too seriously, to hell with them. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that are, this was a guy that had his convictions, and that's to many people the strength of Bret Hart. To some that would say that, he is not someone that is just going to play nice with people because he's in business with them or because this is a WWE co-produced documentary. I mean, you're going to get Bret Hart pretty much unfiltered. I would love to know, I'm sure it was hours and hours and hours of interview time that they sat down with Bret, multiple sessions, as you could see.
Multiple tapes.
And I'm sure that it's very hard to go through Montreal and not talk about Triple H's influence there on Shawn in the lead up to that. It's very significant. He is spared. Bill Goldberg is not. And Bill Goldberg got the brunt of everything. And that's...
Well, he did also say, like, as he was showing us his cartoons, he says, like, oh, Goldberg and Hogan, two of my favorites. And I don't know if I do believe we have a duality when it comes to, like, Bret's opinion on Goldberg. I wouldn't even, like, disagree with if you told me that he and Goldberg were actually friends. But his opinion on him as a wrestler, he does not pull any punches. What did he say? On a scale of, like, 0, like, what, 1 to...
He's 100. A 0 in terms of skill, is what he said. I mean, Bret has never had positive things to say about Goldberg, and I know that Goldberg is. I mean, he has been very public about how awful he feels about that, and it's, you look at it like that. That was the end of his career. I mean, realistically, like, yes, he had the comeback, but that was, for all intents and purposes, the end. And worse was the fact he kept working after Starrcade 2 for several more weeks. That only made things worse. And then has the stroke in 2002. He goes through, they really only focus on Julie. He goes through 2 divorces in that time because...
Yeah, no time.
Yeah. And, he talks about the fact he just wanted to be alone and noted the fact that it was a constant downer always being asked about Montreal. And I totally understand that from his perspective, that I do not, like, Bret is one of those people that I'm sure has envisioned, like, how the stories will be written when he's no longer around. And I don't think he wants Montreal to be the first or second paragraph of his story. I think he looks at that. I think he understands the enormity of that match, but I do not think he wants that to be the match people, and that event is what is first and foremost associated with him. And I completely get that. It's,
oh my God, a guy who took so much pride in his work to have it all overshadowed by something that was done to him and that he had no control over, like arguably the most embarrassing moment of his career. Of course it's a terrible thing.
And then it's just really the comeback stuff in 2010, making up with Shawn, the WrestleMania 26 match that he acknowledges was not my best match, but it was fun. And then meeting Stephanie, his current wife. And it was a really nice closing scene because throughout the documentary, we saw the sit down interview with Jade, but this was the first time we heard from the other kids. And now he's a grandfather, and they kind of had everybody just out there playing street hockey. So it was like a nice feel good end to the documentary.
Yeah, it really did feel like it was like a way for a fan to, maybe see the like their childhood favorite character off in a way that I thought was even better than WrestleMania, which, just felt so artificial. And I mean, the match was bad. So getting this sort of update and not having Bret sort of be your cranky old, person complaining about like Tom McGee being a terrible wrestler or something as like a lasting image was really nice. I enjoyed overall this documentary.
We didn't get the shot though of Bruce standing on top of Vince McMahon at WrestleMania.
Oh, they cut that
cowboy boots.
Yeah. No, Vince didn't comment about that.
No. But there you go. I think like this one, I think this and the Foley ones are the ones that are going to stand out the most, at least for me. Like I would put these at the top of the A&E biographies. And I thought for this one, you were covered. There was a lot to cover in 2 hours. And I think they tried to do as best they could of kind of the key parts, and a lot of it being, life after wrestling too. And I think that's a part. I mean, we didn't even talk about it, but the stuff with Owen and his death is also addressed here. Again, you can look at that fact. It's very hard to go into the Owen story and not go into the facts of the case. And I mean, nothing about the lawsuit, nothing about the company suing Martha. Like, well, obviously,
again, that's the Owen biography, not the Bret biography.
Oh, right? Bret was involved in that. Bret was part of that lawsuit. I mean,
but in a 90-minute Bret Hart documentary, I don't know if they would have had time for all that.
You can certainly make that argument, but again, it follows the theme that like that was not going to be part of this, regardless of time. If they had 5 extra minutes, they weren't going to be inserting stuff about the lawsuit.
They wouldn't do an Owen Hart A&E biography.
They wouldn't, but I mean Bret was very much part of that. So I mean, there was. And the whole family fallout, I mean, that really goes to like just the incredible amount of like family drama that played out in public that Bret was all over. And like the kids, it was really, really contentious, all of that stuff. And it was playing out in public. It was very sad to see in all of that, but they really just limited it to his passing and then the scene with Bret at the cemetery as well. So there you go. Any other closing thoughts on the Bret doc?
No, not so much. I mean, I wasn't really high on this A&E series overall when it started. I thought the Austin one was okay, it was fine, but like felt a little superficial to me. And then you got to the Piper one, which I was not a fan of, and then the Savage one, which I was really not a fan of. And then some of the other ones are somewhat forgettable, but I thought it ended pretty strong with the Foley and Bret one. So, and even the Shawn one I thought was pretty good too.
If they did another run of these, like with people that are ingrained with WWE, I mean, I could certainly see like a Jerry Lawler one. I could see I guess you could do a Triple H one. They've gone through a lot of these.
Anybody.
Well, I mean, it's, who has like that kind of mass appeal as well, I think is what you're
Undertaker. But, they're coming off of the last ride but, again, this is for a different audience, right? So, I don't know. Take your pick. Like maybe they'll do another Andre one. Maybe they'll do probably not a Hulk Hogan.
No, I think if they were going to do Hogan, he would have been in this batch, I would think.
Jared suggests Eddie Guerrero. That would be interesting. Yeah. Rock, Andrew says, of course. So, Cena.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's we'll see if they get another round of these, if they're, what is there the interest for them. The numbers were they were good for A&E standards. So there you go, everybody.